Welcome back, MTG Joe here. Bloomburrow is coming in the next few days, and it is going to be a rotation in Standard. So we are losing a bunch of the older sets. So Dominaria onwards will be legal in Standard. And with that, I wanted to update Mono Red Aggro. It's my favorite deck in Standard. I think we got some new tools. We obviously lost some key cards for the archetype like Mono that we'll take a look at in terms of replacing. And this is kind of my day one deck list. I'm going to go over some of the thoughts of what we're going to be looking at in terms of updating the deck. I think this is a good deck for day one. Generally, mono red does well on day one and earlier on. While people are brewing, you can kind of punish them. Very lean, very aggressive. Inefficient decks tend to lose to mono red. So it's a good time to kind of farm those easier wins while people are still trying to figure out in terms of configuring their decks and stuff like that. Control usually takes a little bit longer to build because they need to figure out what they're controlling against type thing. So that's kind of the thought. It's also, if you are trying to build your collection of the new Bloomburrow cards, this doesn't use too many new cards in terms of rares or mythics. So it's actually something easy on day one to just kind of get built as you then either draft the set or kind of build out through that avenue. So we are going to take a look. So one thing I wanted to start off with, we'll have the deck list here, I'll paste it. I wanted to look at kind of what the deck lists are right now and what notably we're going to be losing. So it comes in. So kind of looking at some of these stock lists from Untapped from the last couple of weeks. Most notably, we're going to be losing Ancestral Anger from some of the lists, as well as Play with Fire. Now, Play with Fire, we have pretty much the same card in Shock. We lose the Scry element, but even just from a paper budget perspective, Shock, I just bought the full art like foils for like 25 cents. This was like a $5 card here in Canada at one point. We still have Forges, which is nice. The big card, Kumano Faces Kakazan. This tiny little enchantment saga did so much work. The pings to the planeswalkers, the counters on things, the flipping to be another attacker while also exiling things. Super relevant card that we are going to be losing in the deck. We're also going to be losing Sokazan. So that's another card that will be rotating out. In terms of the list itself, if we're just looking at various sideboard cards, we are going to be losing End the Festivities. So that is one of the key cards against Convoke, but most of the cards still exist. And you'll see some of the lists actually opt to go with Brotherhood's End instead as like another sweeper option. That's something I've always liked in lieu, because Convoke can get outside of that range. And there's also going to be likely, if we look at Bloomburrow, a lot of the deck cares about like creature tokens going wide, spawn tokens, stuff like that. So just having an answer to it also works out pretty nicely. There is a card for 2 mana that deals 1 damage to each creature from Lost Cavern of Ixalan. I think at that rate, it's a little worse. So I do think if the meta is a lot of X1s, then that's a reasonable call. If it's just creatures in terms of creature mirrors, I think Brotherhood's End is a little bit better. And I'll explain the thoughts of adding a sweeper to your deck that has creatures in it and why it kind of makes sense in a way. I played a lot of mono red for context. I hit number 1 mythic with the alchemy version when it first got popularized. I was one of the first to play that deck in 2022. This is kind of my go-to deck. I have it in paper. I have like every variation. So let's jump into the deck itself. The biggest card we got is Emberheart Challenger. This little mouse here. Let's pull it up. So Emberheart Challenger, 2 mana, 2/2 haste already. Great text. We also lost the adversary, the mono red adversary, that flashback spell. So that's a notable one. 2/2. So it's already better than this. I hate this card. I think this card is really bad. Fugitive Codebreaker. 2/1 just trades down. There's going to be so many like X1s or just like 1 power creatures, the lizards and stuff like that. I just don't think that card's good. It's too much mana to flip and kind of get that value. But haste, prowess, 2/2 for 2. Already great stats on its own for what we want to do. But this card has got another line of text, which is great for an aggressive deck. Valiant, so whenever you target it, so with a spell or ability for the first time each turn, you exile the top card of your library and you get to cast that card for free, or you could play it. So you can actually play the land, which is even better. You can cast a spell, so it's card advantage in the deck, which is nice. And then we're just going to kind of highlight this here, Mouse. Mouse is a subtext that's going to matter for another spell as we kind of go. So we are playing full 4 of this Emberheart Challengers. I just ordered some foils and paper. I'm excited for that. We then go to Heartfire Hero, another mouse. So we're not most tribal, but 8 mice that are 1 and 2 drop play this archetype very well. So Heartfire Hero, another Valiant. So it's a 1/1 for 1. And it has the kind of subtext of when it dies, it deals damage equal to its power to each opponent. So this is another nice way that you still get damage in. So it's not like the, there's the other red 1-drop from Brotherhood's War, I think, that could ping player or permanent, so you can't deal with a creature. This one just goes face, but I think just keeping the counters on it is much better in this one. So every time you target it, it's kind of like a built-in prowess that stays around. You don't get to stack multiple spells into it, but it still gets that added ability, and it is a mouse. We still are playing the full Swiss Spear package, as well as Slick Shots. And then I like playing 1 Squee, and I like it over Godric. We're more of a prowess deck, so Godric is more if you're going to be putting more creature-based, I think. Squee is just a much better resilient threat. So we have a lot of cheap things. Squee kind of gets around temporary lockdown style effects, gets around pest control. It just keeps pushing pressure, and if it dies, we can get it back, which is something we want, right? Obviously, Sunfall is still a card in the format, but just as a 1-of, it's a nice of in the deck. Still have Lightning Strike. Like I mentioned, we have Shock in here. We still have the Monstrous Rage, and then we have Might of the Meek. So I kept mentioning Mouse is relevant for this spell here. So this is basically an additional Monstrous Rage in a way. Target creature gets a target creature gains trample end of turn, and we draw a card. So we don't get the power boost necessarily, unless it's a mouse. So if it is a mouse, it gets +1/0. It doesn't continually have trample, but the card cycles. So it gives us kind of that density of spells that we can kind of play through. So this is another effect that kind of plays well with the deck. So you do with these effects, they do have a limit, like they do have a downside where if you are drawing multiples of like Might of the Meek, Monstrous Rage, and you don't have a creature up, they're kind of dead cards. Now, notably, the Might of the Meek just target creature. So you can target your opponent's creature in a pinch if you just need to cycle. So that's something that's always relevant kind of in the game. But we're going to kind of offset this as well. Just having 10 removal spells, Lightning Strike, Shock, Switch Stalker in the main. We were playing full 3 Case of the Crimson Pulse. So this is another card that you sometimes see in sideboards. I played it in the Pioneer Gruul aggro decks. So enters the battlefield, you discard a card, and then draw 2 cards. So if you have no cards in hand, you basically just draw 2 cards, which is nice. Then if you're Hellbent, you have no cards in hand, you get to solve the case, and then in your upkeep, you just draw 2 extra cards each turn. So at that point, even you could ditch these extra copies when you don't have creatures, but this just adds you to have that resiliency. So while you're not necessarily all in, it does provide some consistency in terms of that. If you're playing this in best of 1, you may want to trim down a case and either play like another Witch Stalker or another creature threat just to have a little bit more density. In best of 3, which tends to be a little bit grindier, this would be kind of the configuration I'd run. Playing 2 Mishra's Foundry, 20 Mountains. I will be trying out Myrex over Mishra's Foundry. I think in grindier matchups is better. Foundry oftentimes just messes up your mana base more than anything, I find. And if you look at this version here, like looking at our mana curve, we're just a lot of 1-drop spells. So a lot of cards are reliant on that single red pip for us to kind of chain together. So it does have me at times worried just in terms of consistently hitting. In terms of the sideboard, so one thing to keep in mind, day 1 sideboards are a little bit of a guess in terms of what you anticipate coming out of the meta. So one thing that I'm kind of doing is hedging and kind of thinking, okay, what's the existing meta? MTGO, I did post, they rotated early, so we got to see kind of a snapshot, basically what 2-year standard rotation was. So I posted some of those deck lists. It is a lot of Golgari. There's domain decks still, just kind of reconfigured mana base. They're playing the Cornucopia in it. There's various like kind of token decks mixed into there, like the Boros Convoke style strategies, stuff of that nature. There's a couple of the Gruul Blitz decks. I think the Gruul decks can output more immediate damage, but have much worse mana bases. So it does lead to a little bit of inconsistency. The one big card is you get Pick Your Poison, which is an answer to Atraxa, which I do like. My thoughts. So I'm actually going to cover Brotherhoods, and we can do it now. So basically, normally this type of effect, you say, well, this kills all your creatures. When you would bring this in is a deck where your creatures usually can't attack in well. So in the mirrors, or against like Boros Convoke, against Toxic, stuff like that, I generally switch my game plan to become more of mono red control. So when you can't run down your opponent reliably and your creatures are understated compared to your opponents, I switch into more of a controlling deck. So I'll remove some of my cheaper creatures, my pump spells, stuff like that. I bring in Brotherhoods, and as a sweeper, oftentimes your opponent tends to overcommit, not anticipating the sweeper. Brotherhood's End, Jaya to kind of shift up my package, as well as Urbrass Forge. So basically my game plan against those creature mirrors is stick a Forge. It has inevitability that it'll push through the damage I need. And then just like Brotherhood's End, removal, Obliterating Bolt, Frenzies, where relevant, Lithomantic Barrage. This is a card that can be a 0 of, it could be a 4 of, it could be anywhere in between. It's really just reliant on the meta. With Rafine gone, that was kind of the main target for it. But we may want to see with this number where it kind of sit. Against like heavy control decks, things like Sunfall, I have the Jayas as well as Urbrass Forge. Same for the Golgari matchup. In terms of the number of like Obliterating Bolt versus Frenzies, if there's a lot of Shield Druid and 5 toughness, you obviously want the 4th Stalker, Witch Stalker Frenzy. These are the numbers as we play games. You would tweak the numbers here and there, so it's not that big of a deal. And then the card that I'm really interested to try out is Sunspine Lynx. This card has got a whole bunch of text that just gets mono red players excited. Players can't gain life. If we just stick this as an evergreen emblem on our opponents, that would be great. So they can't gain life. Damage can't be prevented. Not as relevant here. There's not really fog effects that get played. But it's got the Price of Progress ability stapled on. So it enters the battlefield, it deals damage to each player equal to the number of non-basic lands that player controls. So Domain is playing some density of basics, so it's not like you're just going to deal 10 to them necessarily. They're playing Fable Passage now, they're playing the Surveil land, stuff like that. But against the Golgari deck, they don't play like a huge number of basics against likely a lot of the 2-color mid-range decks. I anticipate them not playing that many basics. So if this could come in, dodge, 3 mana removal spells, stuff like that, and maybe hit your opponent for 5 on an ETB, seems pretty good. Prevent some life gain, plays around that. So that's kind of my thoughts with the card there. So really excited with this one here to try it out. I hope it's good. It seems like it's good. It has a lot of the relevant things that we're looking for in the deck. So that's kind of the idea of the deck. There were a couple of cards I considered. There's the Hook Claw Lizard, the 1-drop, the 1-mana 1/2 Lizard. When it attacks, it basically deals a ping of damage, but it doesn't have haste. It doesn't really play with the mouse theme. Like I said, I'm not really a fan of Fugitive Codebreaker. I think it's too slow. It's too telegraphed. The temporary lockdown style effects. It still gets hit by sweepers, stuff of that nature. It's just too much of a mana commitment. Like if you play, if on turn 3, if you're just tapping out 3 mana to play a 2/2, you're really not doing what mono red wants to do, which is kind of kill your opponent as quick as possible. The card I could see potentially being main boardable is Urbrass Forge. I've liked playing Forge in the main. It might be better over the Squee. So playing some numbers of that could be an alternative as well. But welcome your thoughts. How are you approaching the challenge of mono red? We'll come out with a bunch of new decks with new cards, new archetypes, hopefully. I do a weekly meta game breakdown where we look, if you like this type of stats-based detail, we go over all the stats for all the best decks, best of 1 standard, best of 3 standard, the Explorer formats, Alchemy when it's relevant, Historic, Timeless. We do those weekly on the channel, so make sure to subscribe if you want to keep up to date with all the new hottest decks as well. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you have a great one, and stay safe out there.